Let's take a look at defending ourselves against infectious diseases, infectious communicable diseases, diseases that we can pass to each other through all kinds of things, from liquid droplets in the air, from coughing to contact with blood, to saliva, to any other kind of bodily fluid exchange. In general, there's many different ways to look at this, but you can kind of think of our immune system like a military organization of some sort, where you have, imagine you're on the battlefield, you have the first line defenders. I mean, how many Lord of the Rings movies have I watched? Everything. In the beginning, in the front of the lines, you got people who are just running out, trying to just in general create a mess, wreak havoc. And then people behind are doing some more specific things, like shooting arrows towards targeted bad guys and shooting cannons towards targeted groups of bad guys. So you can think of the first line of defense here when we're talking about protecting ourselves against diseases as the general barriers to infection, and that would be the skin and mucous membranes in these moist inner body linings. You can try to pause the video right now and see if you can, in your mind, match up each one of these things, tough outer layer, to one or the other or both of these particular things right here. So tough outer layer, skin, although there are some things that can still penetrate the skin. That's why when you get a cut, you're supposed to get it sewed up. You get stitches. You don't want to keep that open for a long time, otherwise bacteria can actually get into the body. The skin acts as that outer coat, that layer. Contains glands secreting lactic acid. The skin has a pH of between 5 and 6, and that's one of the reasons is because the presence of lactic acid. Making the skin slightly acidic will help to decrease the amount of bacteria, unwanted bacteria, that's growing on the skin. That refers to the same thing there as well too. Soft areas of skin kept moist with mucus. In the nose, trachea, vagina, urethra, these are the mucous membranes of the body. There are openings to the body. Contain enzymes called lysozyme that kill bacteria. This is also found in the eye, actually. Where would that fit? Well, I guess neither of these places. In trachea, pathogens get caught in sticky mucus. Some pathogens can still get through this barrier, and that's obviously for both of these things. That's the first line of defense. A very basic overview of what's going on here with preventing ourselves from getting sick. Do you get sick all the time? I can't help you. Drink more water. Eat more vitamins. The second line of defense can get very, very detailed. We're just going to try to use these vocabulary words: phagocytes, pathogens, endocytosis, lysozymes, enzymes, and pus in general here. You're going to have to try to imagine all of this as an animation. There's plenty of stuff you can find on YouTube, but I want to try to get you to imagine all this stuff going on inside your head, like you have a little flip book inside your head. It's always good to try to imagine these small, tiny biological processes actually happening on a scale that you can actually picture. You should be familiar with many of these terms already, but overall, here if we have a little bacteria that's entering the body, and this bacteria would be a pathogen. It's something that causes disease, a pathogen. A phagocyte would be, in general, it's a white blood cell. That would be this big guy over here, phagocyte here, which in general its job is to go around and seek out bacteria and try to engulf them or ingest them. So that's a phagocyte. Endocytosis is the process by which these phagocytes can take things up, like Pac-Man style. So the membrane kind of folds inside. Remember, we talked about endocytosis, and takes in the bacteria. This is going to seal off. Once that's totally sealed off, then you end up with kind of a little vesicle containing the bacteria. A lysozyme is a general, oops, what's happening here? What is going on? I'm going to put that back together. Okay, here's our, that's it. That's it. Select Control G group. Okay, here we go. A lysozyme is an organelle. It's membrane bound, and it's kind of like a vesicle that contains specific enzymes for breaking down unwanted materials. So here's a lysosome. I'm sorry if I was saying that incorrectly. So here we have a vesicle that has just engulfed this bacteria by endocytosis. And what's going to happen are these two are going to move together and they're going to fuse. Now these membranes, it's all the same stuff. It's a phospholipid bilayer. And even when it's folded inside, it's the same thing. So these can fuse really easily. Once they fuse, you can kind of picture what's going on over here. Once they fuse, what happens is those enzymes will be exposed to the bacteria inside and then help to break down, digest the bacterial cell wall, and render that new invading bacteria as inert, or it's going to kill it, basically. Pus is what you get as a result of all of that, all of these battles, basically. White blood cells breaking down bacteria and leaving the injured soldiers on the battlefield. So here's some other pictures showing this happening. Here's an actual picture. Okay, looks much better than my little picture over here, but check that out. Look at these bacteria. These guys are dead. This big phagocyte here is going to take them all out. Endocytosis. That's what endocytosis is all about. Here's an artist's rendition of what lysosomes might look like. That was this little thing right here. Okay. And another little diagram showing a phagocyte taking in something. Bacteria, small bits of food, algae, it could be anything. But in this case, I think we should be able to put everything together. So go back, rewind the video a little bit, just write down these words, put them on separate vocabulary cards, and then try to tell a story using all of these terms: phagocytes, pathogens, endocytosis, lysosomes, enzymes, and pus. We're going to go into a lot more detail when we take this to the higher level section, but for now, see if you can put that all together and understand what's going on there. Okay, a few more details here. Pathogens we've already identified as could be the bad guy, the bacteria or the virus or something else that's entered the body. Well, how does our body actually recognize that these are bad guys? They're not wearing little labels that say, "I am a foreign invader, please give me an unwelcoming ceremony," or something like that. What basically happens is these bacteria and viruses have little markers on them. They have little markers on them. They're like protein markers around their cell membrane. Every one of our cells has these special protein markers. And what will happen is our body doesn't recognize these protein markers, and they are called antigens. So in general, as a preview, before we get to the next section on how this all fits together, is understand these words. And antigens are the small little protein markers that are on the outside of a bacterium or on the outside of a virus. A virus is basically an outer coat of protein with DNA inside. So these are called antigens, and our body will try to recognize those things. So think of antigens as the bad guys, and antibodies are the good guys. We have special cells in our body called lymphocytes flowing through our bloodstream. Lymphocytes. Here are some red blood cells. These are the white blood cells. They're fewer in number, but they are lymphocytes. And these lymphocytes, as we'll visit in much more detail later, can produce proteins called antibodies. And antibodies are very specific. So take a look at this diagram, which is showing you some antibodies in blue. So these antibodies are produced by lymphocytes. Okay? These are things that our body is producing. These up here, these antigens, are produced by the bad guys, the viral particles or the bacterium. And take a look at this. Our body produces many, many different lymphocytes, and each one of them can actually produce a specific shape of an antibody. And these antibodies, well, you can see just by the shapes. Now, this is overly simplified to show you kind of a lock and key enzyme type mechanism. But the point is to understand that the antibodies will match specific antigens. I can see that this antibody here will probably not bind to or recognize this particular antigen. This is a very important concept, and it helps us understand everything from why we get sick in the beginning to how we even get better to how we can get something like chickenpox and never get it again, to how vaccinations and immunizations actually work. to help prevent us from getting sick, okay? I'm not going to go into all the detail right now, but understand that our body produces lots of different types of antibodies, and they are specific to matching up to different types of antigens. So tuberculosis, for example, would produce a certain type of antigen, and if our body is lucky enough to have some antibodies that match the antigens on the tuberculosis bacterium, then we can actually fight that off a lot faster. More on that a little bit later. So understand this battle between antigens and antibodies in terms of recognizing what's good and what's bad. All right, antibodies are proteins that recognize and bind to specific antigens. Antigens are the foreign substances that stimulate the production of antibodies. One final thing, I guess, to say before we end this particular video is that once we find a match, let's say this particular antibody matches, so we have a match. So let's match. Okay, look at that. Once they match, then our antibodies here, along with the lymphocyte that actually produced this particular antibody, undergoes a crazy chain reaction. It's so happy that it's just made a match, okay? It's just celebrating all over the place, okay? And once it makes a match, what happens is this particular lymphocyte over here starts cloning itself like crazy, and we get tons and tons of these particular antibodies getting built. These ones not so much. They're not so useful in this particular battle of tuberculosis invasion. This one not so much too. Maybe this one is good for influenza or some other type of disease like chlamydia. But in this case, this one is the winner, chicken dinner. And so this one is actually going to produce a whole bunch. And it'll help in this particular invasion. And guess what? They'll actually stick around in the future in case we come across tuberculosis again. Okay, I think that's enough for me. If you have some questions, please post them on Edmodo. Let me know what's going on. We're going to visit this in a lot more detail. And I have a nice little story to help you out with that. All right, thanks.